If you could get out your notes. We didn't quite finish last week, and I want to make sure we start on time so that we can try to finish where I want to be when we're done here this morning. We were talking about the Crusades. Last Sunday we were looking at a lesson called The Internal History of the Catholic Church. We looked at the question of lay investiture, who had the power to appoint bishops. We looked at the struggle between Gregory and Henry over that issue, and how the Pope excommunicated the Emperor, and the Emperor came and begged forgiveness in the snow and kissed his feet. And the Pope let him back into the church and lifted the excommunication and so forth. We looked at the idea of the theory of the two swords, the Catholic philosophy of papal power. We also looked at the Crusades. And we also looked at the break between the Eastern Orthodox and the Roman Catholic Church and what that was about. And then we finished in the middle of a conversation dealing with the Crusades. Okay? Based on what you guys told me, this is roughly where we left off at the bottom of page 5, top of page 6. And so we're kind of, unfortunately, jumping right into the middle of this discussion, but for the sake of time, that's kind of what we're going to have to do. But we looked at the fact that this is the extent of the Crusader kingdoms that the Catholics conquered on the Crusades. Okay, it's about a 650-mile strip. It's going to be divided into roughly 4 kingdoms here after the First Crusade, and this is the height of the Christian-controlled territory in the quote Holy Land as a result of the First Crusade. Okay, now the other subsequent Crusades are going to be abysmal failures. Okay, the Catholics are going to lose all this territory back to the Muslims. The Muslim conqueror Saladin is going to come on the scene, and he's going to basically clean house with the Christians. Okay, but this is where I was making this point when we left off. The most significant outcome of the Crusades was the cementing of the break between the Western and Eastern Church. Okay, Mark Hainault reports that the Fourth Crusade of 1202 through 1204 was a special disaster that so deeply poisoned relations between East and West that it would that it would be justified to see it rather than the events of 1054 as the final break between the great traditions and these two great traditions in the church. Something happens on the Fourth Crusade in 1204 that cements the break. We talked already last Sunday about the 1054 schism between the Eastern Orthodox and the Roman Catholics. Up till the Fourth Crusade, there was still hope amongst these two entities that they could sort of work out a compromise or figure out whatever their differences were and sort of reunite. But in 1204, that is going to prove impossible. Yes?
Keys, you set the alarm on the car and it's going off.
Oh. You can cut that out.
Sorry.
It was Pope Innocent III who inspired the Fourth Crusade. The crusade would finally divide Eastern and Roman Christians. The intent of Innocent III was simply to destroy the Muslim army based in Egypt. Merchants of Venice agreed to supply crusaders with ships at a cost of 84,000 silver coins. In the summer of 1202, the crusaders arrived in Venice expecting to sail to Egypt, but there was a problem. Only 1/3 of the expected number of crusaders showed up. That's the first problem. And second, they only had 50,000 silver coins. So they had fewer soldiers than they needed and not enough money to pay for it. Okay? But, as you know, if you have an army assembled, well, you better do something with them. Okay? So, an Eastern prince offered to finance the crusade under one condition. The condition that he gives is that the Crusaders had to sail to Constantinople and dethrone the current Eastern Emperor before heading to Egypt. So this guy says, okay, I'll pay for it, but if I'm going to pay for it, you got to go over here, take out the Eastern Emperor in Constantinople, and then I'll pay for you to go the rest of the way down to Egypt. Okay? So Pope Innocent III forbade the attack. Okay, he would not allow it, but no one seemed to care. As one might expect, as the citizens of Constantinople were less Okay, they're less than thrilled with this intrusion. So they deposed the emperor and installed an anti-crusader emperor, having set out to destroy the Muslims. The now stranded crusaders decided to plunder the city. So there's nowhere for them to go. They're not accomplishing their task. The citizens of the city of Constantinople have chosen a new emperor who's an anti-crusading emperor. And so here's this crusading army that's there with really nothing to do. And so they decide they're going to do what? Well, the city's there, we're an army, we might as well take the city. Okay? So, what happens here, Jones reports that a priest, without the Pope's approval, told the Crusaders, if you rightly intend to conquer this land and bring it under Roman obedience, all who die partake in the Pope's indulgence. Okay? To partake in an indulgence was to be free from earthly punishment and the need to perform penance for one's sins. Consequently, many Crusaders viewed themselves as free to behave as they wished. On Good Friday, 1204, the Crusaders, with red crosses on their tunics, sacked Constantinople. For 3 days, they raped and killed Christians in the name of Christ. The city's statues were hacked to pieces and melted down. The Church of Holy Wisdom was stripped of its gold vessels. A harlot performed sensual dances on the Lord's tables, singing vile drinking songs. And one Eastern writer lamented Muslims are merciful compared with these who bear Christ's cross on their shoulders. So they go in there and they just have a free-for-all. Okay? Raping, plundering, pillaging, you name it, these guys do it as they go in there. Okay? After this orgy of destruction, the Latins attempt to set up a replacement for the Byzantine emperor. They failed miserably. Within a few decades, the city was regained by an Eastern Orthodox Byzantine. And even before the end of 1204, Pope Innocent had condemned the murderous conquest of the city. Now, a couple things here. It's real fascinating how the popes decide when it's okay and not okay to use force. Because the same pope is the guy, this Pope Innocent III is the same pope that's issuing the inquisitional orders against the Waldensians and the groups that we already studied, but yet he's mad about this and condemns it. Okay, so based on what authority does he condemn one and not the other? It's difficult to really say. Okay, but the bottom line here, for our purposes in this class, we could spend weeks breaking down all the gory details of the Crusades. We're not going to do that because it's not necessary. What you need to know is the essentials that we've just gone over. And the single biggest outcome of the Crusades is that it permanently breaks the Eastern and Roman Church as a result of them sacking the city and the behavior of these Catholics when they do that in 1204. Okay? But there are... somebody was asking me last Sunday about comparisons between Catholic and Orthodox. So, between last Sunday and this Sunday, I inserted this. Just a comparison of the names, Catholic and Orthodox, what they mean, the structure, how the different churches are structured out here, and then also discussion of the different authority and how they work. Alright? So, the word Catholic obviously means worldwide or universal. We've gone over and spent a lot of time talking about the structure of the Catholic Church. The authority, we've also talked about that. The Scripture is interpreted through church council's tradition in union with the Pope. Okay? And then we've been talking about Orthodox last week and a little bit this Sunday, what that means. Orthodox means correct belief and implies faithfulness to the Church's ancient teachings and traditions. So when we talk about the difference between Catholic and Orthodox, these are some of the major differences. Okay? The structure is different. There's not a high pope. There's a metropolitan patriarch, or city father, that guides each group of churches. And there is no equivalent necessarily with the idea of a pope in the Eastern Orthodox Church, although the Patriarch of Constantinople, the modern city of Istanbul, is viewed as an important bishop, but not on the same level as, say, the Catholics view the Pope. And their authority is based on apostolic teaching recorded in the Scripture. They only accept the first 7 church councils and also the writings and teachings of the church fathers. Okay? So there are differences, significant differences between Catholics and Eastern Orthodox. Effects of the Crusades. 300 years of crusading had a major impact on Middle Ages Europe and sowed the seeds of the Renaissance and the decline of feudalism. Okay? According to the authors of world history, patterns of interaction, the Crusades yielded the following effects. Now these are important. Okay? Number one, trade expanded between Egypt and Southeast Asia, particularly in spices, fruits, and cloth. Okay?
Egypt or Europe?
What did I say?
You said Egypt.
Europe and Southwest Asia, sorry. Number two, failure of later crusades weakened the power of the papacy. Number three, feudal nobility also declined as thousands of knights lost their lives and fortunes. In turn, the power of the kings began to increase. So you're going to start to see a centralizing of power again in the hands of kings as one of the effects of the Crusades. Fourth, the fall of Constantinople weakened the Byzantine Empire. And fifth, it obviously left a legacy of religious bitterness between Christians and Muslims, which still continues to this day. Okay? They laid the groundwork for the Renaissance. This is important. To me, this is the most important thing. They laid the groundwork for the Renaissance by stimulating economic growth in the Italian city-states and reintroducing Western Europe to the classical literature of ancient Greece and Rome. Remember when the Middle Ages started, when the Dark Ages started and Rome fell, like we talked about weeks ago now, okay? It's like the lights went out, right? Who preserved, in large measure, the writings of ancient Greek and Roman thinkers, historians, and philosophers? It was the Muslims. And so contact between the Catholics and the Muslims during the Crusades reintroduced to Europe a lot of these works that had previously been lost to the mindset of a lot of people in Western Europe. And so that reintroduction of those things is going to ultimately lead to the Renaissance and is going to affect a lot of things that are going to come after that, even in terms of church history, which we will begin discussing in our next lesson, which we're going to start now, unless there are questions about Crusades and the effects of the Crusades. Yes? Can I answer this while I change my PowerPoint?
You said that the Muslims preserved the classical literature. Where and how did they do that?
Muslim scholars came across copies of this stuff that had circulated throughout the Middle East, particularly in the Byzantine areas, and kept them in their libraries. And so when the Catholics come down and establish these Crusader kingdoms and are living a lot closer in proximity to Muslims, a lot of Catholics rediscover some of these things that had previously been lost, and then a lot of it's going to start trickling back to Europe. And once it gets back to Europe, it's going to start having an effect, particularly in the intellectual communities of Europe.
Had the Roman Church intentionally not let people read that stuff, or did it just kind of happen that way?
I think it just kind of happened. I don't think they intentionally did that. I think it just kind of happened as a result of the fall of Rome and so forth. So I don't think it was necessarily that they set out to do that. Okay? Now, all that discussion leads us now to what we're going to talk about today. How many have ever heard of scholasticism? One person. Okay? Two people. So that rediscovery of that work is going to have an impact. Okay? Alistair E. McGrath, author of Christian Theology, an introduction, informs his readers that a complete definition of scholasticism is difficult due to the varied nature of the movement. Nonetheless, McGrath offers the following working definition. So now I'm on the other notes now for this week. Scholasticism is best regarded as the medieval movement, flourishing in the period between 1200 and 1500. That's right at the end of the Crusades. If the Fourth Crusade happens in 1204, that cements the break. from 1200 to 1500, you're right in that time period where you'd start to see the effects of the Crusades upon Europe. Scholasticism is best regarded as the medieval movement flourishing in the period between 1200 and 1500, which placed emphasis upon the rational justification of religious belief and systematic presentation of those beliefs. Scholasticism, thus, does not refer to a specific system of beliefs, but a particular way of organizing theology. A highly developed method of presenting material, making fine distinctions, and attempting to achieve a comprehensive view of theology. So what is going to happen as one of the effects of the Crusades is going to be that as Western Catholics are reintroduced to the writings of Plato and Aristotle, they are going to begin to try to merge in their understanding and explain what the relationship is between faith and reason. Okay? And the result of that is going to be what we call scholasticism, or the schoolmen movement that takes place within the Catholic Church. And that's what I want to spend some time talking about here. Scholasticism may be argued to have produced vitally important work in a number of key areas of Christian theology, especially in relation to the role of reason and logic in theology. The writings of Thomas Aquinas, Duns Scotus, and William of Ockham, often singled out as the three most influential of all scholastic writers, make massive contributions to this area of theology, which have served as landmarks ever since. Now, I'm going to go over this stuff with you, and then I'm going to give you some observations and things you need to think about in relationship to it, okay, and how it affects us. Paul Enns, author of the Moody Handbook of Theology, also comments on the nature and origin of scholasticism in his chapter on medieval theology. Enns states scholasticism is the term given to the monastic school called the scholae in Latin during the 11th and 12th centuries. It was there that scholars came to study in order to defend and explain the faith from a rational point of view. They did not endeavor to uncover new truth, but sought to defend the doctrines of the church through reason. This is important, okay? The scholastics are not stepping outside of the Catholic box. Okay? They are not questioning the teachings of the church. What they're doing is trying to explain them in a reasoned, rational sense. But most of them are Catholics to the core. Okay? You follow what I'm saying?
Why do they need to do this?
Well, we were talking about how as one of the effects of the Crusades, which we were talking about last week, is that the classical writings of Plato and Aristotle and the Greeks and the ancient Romans are reintroduced to these people in Western Europe as a result of the Crusades. And so as they read them, they are feeling like they have to come up with an explanation of how faith and reason work together. Now, scholasticism became prominent in large part because, and here it is, of the translation in the 12th century of the works of Aristotle. Now, again, how did Europeans, specifically Western Catholic Europeans, how did they come reacquainted with Aristotle? They became reacquainted with Aristotle through the Crusades and their contact with the Muslims who had these writings preserved in their libraries. Okay? Scholastics followed the deductive logic of Aristotle in their approach to understanding biblical truth. There were three forms of scholasticism. Now, I debated how much to go over this with you, and so I decided to take a more moderate tone, okay? I could have went exhaustive, and I could have went extremely minimalist, so I tried to go in the middle, okay? But there are generally three groups of what they call scholastics. One is realism. The realists are going to follow Plato, taught that the universal ideas exist apart from individual objects. Okay? This is a podium, right? Everybody agrees that's a podium?
Yeah.
What Aristotle says about the podium is that somewhere out there's a perfect form of a podium. And that one is representative of the perfect podium form that exists. Okay? So, somewhere there are perfect forms of everything that we see on earth according to Plato. Now, that's all I'm going to say about that. You read about that on your own if you want. Anselm and this Bonaventure were realists. Moderate realists followed Aristotle, taught that universal ideas such as truth and goodness have an objective existence, but are not separate from their existence in individual things. So, that is still a what? A podium. For who? For Aristotle. Okay? So Aquinas, you've all heard of Aquinas College in Grand Rapids, named after who? Thomas Aquinas. Were representative of this view, and then the nominalists, which was a reaction against the realists, taught that that ideas have no existence outside the mind. Ockham represents this view. Now, nominalists denied anything outside of human experience, hence they denied the Trinity. Okay? So, this is what being a schoolman is going to get you. They're trying to reconcile Plato, Aristotle, and classical Greek philosophy with Catholic doctrine. Okay? Now, I want to be careful. I did not say to you that Ockham denied the Trinity. I'm saying to you that there are many nominalists that denied the what? The Trinity. Okay? Shelley informs his readers that the goal of the schoolmen, as they are sometimes called, was twofold. Number one, to reconcile Christian doctrine and human reason, and to arrange the teachings of the church in an orderly system. Now, how many of you have heard of systematic theology? There was no such thing as systematic theology before the scholastics. Because one of the chief outcomes of what these guys do is they systematize theology. Okay? So when you go to Bible college, when you go to the average Bible college or seminary and you take a theology class and they hand you your textbook, it will almost 98% of the time be a systematic theology book. Okay? And if you don't know anything about systematic theology, systematic theology, as the name implies, is man's attempt to systematically systematize the explanation of God. Okay? And they have all these, I'm going to spell most of them wrong, okay, but you'll forgive me, you'll use grace with me. Like, they'll talk about theology proper. What's that mean?
Study of God.
That's study of God. They'll talk about soteriology. What's soteriology?
Salvation.
Study of salvation. Okay? They'll talk about bibliology. What's that? Study of the Bible. Okay? They'll talk about eschatology. Eschatology is a study of what? End times or last things. Okay? All of that, folks, is systematic theology. This type of systematizing of the faith is a direct result of these Catholic scholastics. Okay? Now, when you go to the Bible, come with me to 2 Timothy 2:15. What does 2 Timothy 2:15 say? Study to show thyself systematically approved. Is that what it says? No. It says, study to show thyself approved unto God as a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, doing what? Rightly dividing the word of truth. If you're gonna study the Bible the way the Bible tells you to study, you're not gonna do it like this. Okay? You're going to do it what is the Bible's own system of interpretation that was written into the Bible by inspiration when God wrote it? It's the dispensational method of Bible study. Now, I want to say something. It's not that this isn't somewhat beneficial. Okay? It's not that this isn't somewhat beneficial, but the problem is this. What Protestant theologians have done is they've adopted this system and basically cannot think about God, the Bible, or theology outside of these terms. You guys know about Charles F. Baker's book, A Dispensational Theology. A dispensational theology is a systematic theology written from a dispensational point of view. Did you follow what I just said? Okay. But this type of systematizing of the faith into an orderly system is what these guys are after here. Okay?
What would be the alternative to the systematic theology?
Well, to me, it would just be a straight-up dispensational theology. Here, look, I don't have any necessarily... I can appreciate this on some level because it does make discussion easier on some level, but the problem is that a lot of people, they can't think outside of these boxes.
It seems to me if you don't do systematic, you're going to have to cater then to Calvinistic theology, which are biblicists, and they don't want anything to do with systematic theology.
And so that's what you end up having is arguments between which system of theology is the one to use. Okay? Go to Ephesians 2. Ephesians 3, Ephesians 3. So, my opinion of this is mixed. Okay? On the one hand, I think it's helpful, but on the other hand, I think it's somewhat... If that's all you do, I think you're going to be in trouble because you need to we need to always remember, the way God said His Word should be understood. Ephesians 3, for this cause I, Paul, the prisoner of Jesus Christ, for you Gentiles, if you have heard of the dispensation of the grace of God, which is given unto me to you. What Charles F. Baker did, and I think he did it quite, one of the things I forgot here is ecclesiology, the doctrine of the church. So what he does when he comments on all of these things is he does it in such a way that keeps in mind how a dispensational perspective of the Scripture ought to influence the way you think about those subjects. Okay? Now, the other thing that Shelley does is he says, and this is important, he says that a free search for truth was never in view by the scholastics. Okay? This was not just an open search for truth. The chief doctrines of the Christian faith were regarded as fixed by the Catholic Church. Okay? The purpose of discussion was to show the reasonableness of their doctrines and to explain their implications. But make no mistake about it, these guys are fundamentally Catholics. They are not having a free search for truth. They're trying to explain the doctrines of the Catholic Church in a reasonable way and explain them in a systematic fashion. Now, lest I mislead you, the entire systematization of theology that I just kind of went over with you here is the end product of what those guys started. Okay? They were not as precise and as articulate and as accurate as what modern systematic theology is. But they started the movement to systematize the faith. Okay? Questions about that?
I had Schaeffer's 13-14 book of theology, and I gave them all away. I should have run church.
Look, I have 7 or 8 different systematic theology books.
How many?
7 or 8 different series, I've got Schaeffer, I've got Baker, I've got Geisler, and they're useful to me because I can go and I can read what does this person say about angels?
Right.
What does this person say about inspiration? What does this person say about the rapture or about the tribulation? And so it's not that they're unuseful, okay? But you have to understand what you're doing when you read that, okay? The first one I want to talk to you about specifically is Anselm of Canterbury. He was born in Italy and soon moved to France, quickly mastered the arts of logic and grammar, and acquired a formidable reputation as a teacher. Anselm made decisive contributions in two areas of discussion. Number one, proofs for the existence of God. And number two, a rational interpretation of Christ's death upon the cross. Well, that sounds thrilling, doesn't it? In this book, in prosologion, is a Latin word, Anselm sets himself about the task of formulating an argument which will lead to the existence and character of God as the highest good. The resulting analysis is often known as the ontological argument for the existence of God. Now, I debated long and hard this week of whether or not I was going to actually include a statement of the ontological argument for the existence of God in the notes, and I decided not to. Because if I did, we would become bogged down in a bunch of logical mumbo-jumbo. And if you want to know, and in my opinion, of all the arguments for the existence of God, this one is the weakest one. Okay? So I didn't include it because I don't want to get bogged down or spend too much time in it. But you need to know that Anselm is the first guy to articulate it. Anselm's work demonstrates a clear appeal to reason in matters of theology, and Anselm affirmed that no one can completely grasp God's actions. Yet he denied that God contradicted logic. To the contrary, logic reflected the order and design of creation, and this orderliness pointed to the glory and power of God. Now, on that point, I can say that I agree with Anselm. Okay? There are some things here that these guys are going to say that I think that you and I can agree with. Is there order in creation? Yes. Order in creation can only come from an orderly being. Right? So, and is there logic? Do we use logic? Do we use reason when we study the Bible? Let me give you a clear example. It says in Luke chapter 1, as has been spoken in the prophets since the world began. It says in Romans 16, 25 and 26, has been kept secret since the world began. Is there a difference between that which was spoken since the world began and that which was kept secret since the world began? Yeah, and how do you know that? Because you apply logic. You understand that when two things are different, they both can't be what? Right. The same. So these guys are they're not like totally out in left field somewhere. We do use reason, we do use logic when we study the Scripture, so we can make comparisons. We do this all the time, especially as mid-Acts dispensationalists who seek to rightly divide the word of truth. The name of Pastor Stam's book is what? The Things That Differ. Well, how do you recognize the things that differ if you're not making logical comparisons and contrasts between what God says here and what He says over there? You follow that? Anselm's most important work is Cur Duas Homo, and it means why God became man. In this work, Anselm seeks to set out a rational demonstration of the necessity of God becoming man, and an analysis of the benefits which occur to humanity as a result of the incarnation and obedience of the Son of God. Paul Enns reports that Anselm taught that through sin man had robbed God of the honor that was due Him. God could either elect to punish sin or to provide satisfaction, whereby His honor would be vindicated by providing the gift of His Son. He chose the latter through His death. He chose the latter, and through His death, Christ brought honor back to God, according to what Anselm says. Okay? Questions about Anselm?
A lot of deep thinking.
Yeah. Aquinas. Aquinas is referred to by Lorette as the Prince of the Schoolmen. So who is the pinnacle of the scholastic movement? It's Aquinas. Okay? Aquinas was born in Italy, the youngest son of Count Landulf Aquino, nicknamed the Dumb Ox. due to his physical stature. Aquinas decided to join the Dominican order in 1244. Desiring him to become a Benedictine monk instead, his brothers forcibly imprisoned him in the family castle for 1 year, hoping he would change his mind. Eventually, Aquinas got away, became a Dominican, as well as one of the most important religious thinkers of the Middle Ages. In 1266, he began the most famous of his writings, usually known by its Latin title, Summa Theologica. You ever heard of it? Some of you may have heard of it, okay? In this work, Thomas developed a detailed analysis of key aspects of Christian theology, such as the role of reason and faith, as well as detailed analysis of key doctrinal questions, such as the divinity of Christ. The work is divided into 3 parts, with the second part subdivided into 2. Part 1 deals chiefly with God the Creator, Part 2 the restoration of humanity to God, and Part 3 the manner in which the person and work of Christ brings about the salvation of humanity. Among Aquinas' key contributions to theology, the following are of critical importance. And we are going to talk about this for a few minutes. The first thing is the 5 ways, or Aquinas' arguments for the existence of God. Okay? The first way stems from the observation that things in the world are in motion or change. Okay? The world is not static, but is dynamic. Things do not just move, they are moved. Each cause of motion must have a cause. Aquinas reasoned that there must be a single cause at the origin of the series. You follow that? Things have a cause, right? It's the law of causation. Well, if you go back far enough, he says there had to have been an original what? Cause that caused everything else to go. You follow that? That's the first way, according to Aquinas. The second way begins with the idea of causation. One event, the effect, is explained by the influence of another, the cause. Aquinas argued that all events must be tracked back to a single original cause, which is God. Okay, that's what he calls his second way. The third way deals with the difference between contingent and necessary beings. God is a necessary being. Humans are contingent beings, according to Aquinas. Therefore, he argues that a being comes into existence because something which already exists brought it into being. In other words, our existence is caused by another being, i.e., who? You understand the difference between contingent and necessary beings? Okay? So, in my mind, Aquinas is doing some good work here on this issue. In terms of thinking through these things. The fourth way begins from human values such as truth, God, goodness, and nobility. Where do these values come from? What causes them? Aquinas argues that there must be something which is in itself true, good, and noble, and that this being, and this brings forth our ideas of truth, goodness, and nobility. The origin of these ideas is God, who is their original cause. So this is what we would call the argument for morality. Okay? There's 4 or 5 major arguments for the existence of God. One of them is the ontological argument, and then you get into the teleological argument, the cosmological argument. You get into all these things, and a lot of them are stemming from Aquinas. The fifth way is the teleological argument. Aquinas notes that the world shows obvious traces of intelligent design. This design is the result of a designer or someone or something else. Arguing from this observation, Aquinas concludes that the source of this natural ordering must be conceded to be who? God. So, in this sense, I think Aquinas has done some good work. in terms of helping to explain the rational understandings for the existence of God. But this question is ultimately a question of what? Faith. The fool has said in his heart, there is no what? God. Okay? These are helpful, but these don't save you. Okay? These are helpful if you're dealing with somebody who is, logically inclined and would like to maybe hear a bit more of a rational explanation for the faith. But they don't explain everything. Okay? They're not all inclusive, but I think they are helpful for what they are. Okay? Come with me to Romans chapter 1. Any questions or comments about the yeah.
It just takes you as far as God. It doesn't take you, like you said, to salvation.
Right. I mean, it takes you only so far. But what it does show, my view of apologetics is this. You guys are all familiar with this illustration, right? That God is over here, man is over here, and what separates man from God? Sin. The first use of apologetics is that it brings the sinner to the precipice, where they then have to make a choice of faith whether they're going to do what? Accept the work of Christ on their behalf. Okay? The other value of apologetics is for the person that has already made that choice to be able to look back across and see that our faith makes sense. Okay? We didn't just take some random leap of faith into some dark, nebulous existence when we trusted Christ, like the atheists want to say. Okay? We chose to appropriate the only provision for sin that God would allow and accept. So, Aquinas can get somebody to this point as far as believing there is a God, but it's not going to save them. And what it could do for us, it'll help us to look back and see that our faith in God, our faith in the Word of God, does make what? Sense. Brother Lee?
Well, that seems to be very necessary. How the Bible says, how can all who come to God must believe that He exists. So it seems to me you have two decisions on the way to salvation. Number one, you need to believe that God exists. That's very useful, what you've just said. The second decision is believe what God has done, and that's Christ. Right.
Yeah. So I think that from that sense, I think what Aquinas says about those issues is valuable. Now you should not say, or not go from here thinking that I'm giving a total sanction to everything Aquinas taught, because I'm not. Okay? The other thing is what's called the principle of analogy. Now, before we read this, look at Romans chapter 1. Verse 19. Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath what? Shown it unto them. For the invisible things of of Him from the creation of the world are clearly what? Seen. How are they clearly seen? Being understood by the things that are what? Made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without what? Excuse. What Aquinas is talking about when he deals with the principle of analogy, okay? He says that this provides the theological foundation for knowing God through creation. Okay? The fact that God created the world points to a fundamental analogy of being between God and the world, according to Aquinas. There is a continuity between God and the world on account of the expression of the being of God in the being of the world. In other words, when God creates, do attributes of God show up in what He made? Yes. Okay? For this reason, it is legitimate to use entities within the created order as analogies for God, according to Aquinas. In doing this, theology does not reduce God to the level of a created object or being. It merely affirms that there is a likeness or correspondence between God and that being, which allows the latter to act as a signpost to God. A created entity can be like God without being identical to God. Look, when you want to understand God as your Father, the first relationship that pops into your mind is what? Your earthly father. Now, hopefully you have a good earthly father. Okay? If you don't, God's not anything like your earthly father. But a lot of the things that we understand about God, we understand through making comparisons with what we are aware of here on earth, right? This verse 20 says, that the way that the invisible things from the creation of the world are clearly seen and understood is by the things that are what? Made. So this is what Aquinas is dealing with when he talks about the principle of analogy. Okay? Yeah.
In some churches, they want to get rid of God as Father because a lot of people had bad fathers, but people who had bad fathers, even as children, have an innate sense of what a good father would be like.
Yes.
Where would that come from?
It came from God.
Yeah.
Yeah. The whole thing there, here in Romans, go to Romans 8. The whole Abba Father concept. In Romans chapter 8, verse 14 and 15. Look at the verse 14. For as many as are led by the Spirit of God, they are the what? Andrew and Daniel are my sons. Right? In an earthly sense. If we're led by the Spirit, we are the sons of God in a what? Spiritual sense. Verse 15. For ye have not received the spirit of bondage again to fear, but ye have received the spirit of adoption, whereby we cry what? Abba Father. Hey, Dad. Okay? So there's a connection there. There's an analogy that you can make to help you understand the concept, and that's what he's saying with that notion. Okay? Third principle is the relation between faith and reason. Working under the assumption that the Christian faith is rational, Aquinas theorized that the faith can be supported and explored through reason. Aquinas' 5 ways illustrate his belief that reason is capable of lending support to the ideas of faith. However, he did not believe that the Christian faith was limited to what could be ascertained by reason. Faith goes beyond reason, having access to truths and insights of revelation, which reason cannot hope to father or discover unaided. Reason has the role of building upon what is known by revelation, exploring what its implications might be. In this sense, for Aquinas, theology is a rational discipline because it used rational methods to build upon and extend what is known by revelation. We don't know God apart from what? The Bible. We don't know God apart from His revelation to humanity. And where has God revealed Himself to humanity? The creative order, general revelation, and through His Word, specific what? Revelation. Okay? Now, Philip Schaff calls Aquinas the Prince of the Schoolmen and places him next to Augustine and Origen in terms of their theological significance. Ooh. What have we already studied about those guys? Now I can tell you right now, have I been a lot more kind so far with Aquinas than I was with those other 2 guys? Okay? But here we go, okay? While professing to believe the Scriptures were the only final authority, and that their testimony, and that the testimony of the Church Fathers was only probable, that's from Schaff, Aquinas held unswervingly to the following Catholic doctrines in his magnum opus Summa Theologica. He says that infants are in hell for Adam's sin. Okay? He says that if the sacrament of baptism is not given, babies are lost forever. In addition, he says that there is no salvation without Roman Catholic water baptism. I'm going to be giving you a link when I update the website this week to Summa Theologica. You can go read it yourself. Okay? Number 2, the Catholic Church can save or damn anyone by giving or refusing to give water baptism to them. Okay? And it's okay to kill heretics or kings who will not submit to the authority of the Pope. So here we go. Well, I'll give you this. In the end, Aquinas cannot be viewed as anything but a card-carrying Roman Catholic. Okay? In 1567, he was declared a respected teacher, a doctor of the Roman Catholic Church. So what do we do? Are there areas, a few areas, where Aquinas may be helpful to us? Okay? Are there a lot of other areas where we have to say, no way? Okay? But is this really any different than anybody else you would want to read? If I pick up a commentary by, Chuck Swindoll, or if I pick up a commentary by, John MacArthur, are they going to say stuff that we view as not in line with the Word rightly divided? Okay? So I'm not making excuses for Aquinas. Aquinas was who he was. He was a card-carrying Roman Catholic. He taught the major Catholic doctrines, but there are a few areas where Aquinas should be looked at because he does seem to be somewhat helpful. Okay? Any questions about Aquinas? Okay, William of Ockham. William of Ockham was born in England, and studying at Oxford is considered the last of the scholastics. According to Ruckman, Ockham is the only schoolman who resembled a Bible believer. Citing the German historian Kropatschek, Ruckman reports the following regarding the teachings of Ockham. He says, he boldly attacked the papal presentation on many points, but especially on the temporal dominion and plenitude of power. He denied... What am I doing here?
I don't know.
Did I skip ahead?
Yes.
Yeah, must have. Yep.
Is
that the one? That's the one I want, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
Ockham taught that the Bible alone was inerrant and that a Christian should not believe anything not found in the book, no matter who authorized it or who recommended it.
Yay.
Whoa.
Okay? Number 2, Ockham taught further that the New Testament church was not the Catholic hierarchy, but the community of the faithful. In addition, Ockham denied the infallibility of the Pope, and Schaff reports that Ockham was excommunicated by Pope Benedict VII. Well, of course he was. Of course he was. Because he's teaching things that the Pope cannot what?
Tolerate.
He can't tolerate. So, if you're comparing Ockham with Aquinas, Aquinas is never excommunicated. Aquinas is dubbed the doctor of the Catholic Church. Where Ockham comes and says, wait a minute, the Pope isn't infallible, you shouldn't believe anything unless the Bible says it, and what's the Pope's response? You got to get out of here. Okay? Now, Miller reports the following. He boldly attacked the papal pretensions on many points, but especially as to temporal dominion and plenitude of power. He denied the infallibility of the Pope and general councils and maintained that the Emperor was not dependent on the Pope, but the Emperor has the right of choosing him. No wonder he was excommunicated. The anti-papal opinion soon spread in all directions, and he died under the sentence of excommunication in Munich in 1347. Okay? Ockham is also famous for what is called Ockham's razor. You ever heard that expression before? Ockham's razor is a famous expression that comes from the writings of this scholastic. Ockham advocated the elimination of all hypotheses, okay, which were not absolutely essential. Through this approach, Ockham declared that justification was the direct acceptance of the sinner by God. The way was thus open to a more personalist approach of justification associated with the early Reformation. So is Ockham teaching justification by faith? Seems that he is, and therefore he's what? Kicked out. Same like we've seen with all the other people that dare question the authority of the church. McGrath summarizes the impact of the scholastic movement. He writes, two themes began to dominate the theological debate, and the need to systematize and expand Christian theology, and the need to demonstrate the inherent rationality of that theology. So this whole systematizing of the theology is coming out of this. The whole idea of of explaining the relationship between faith and reason is coming out of this. Okay? Yeah.
So did Ockham study Aquinas and then take it further? Is that what kind of happened?
If you read the history books, that's what they sort of imply, yes. Yeah.
So it takes more than one lifetime to figure these things out after it's been clouded.
Maybe. Yeah, I mean, just as we demonstrated how there was a progressive degeneration into error, there's also a progressive recovery of truth, or a process by which truth is recovered. One generation sees something, they teach it clearly. The next generation comes along, they see, okay, we got that, and then they look and they get something else. And then there's also groups that we've looked at who were never a part of the error.
Yeah.
They maintain what we would consider to be a much more relatively pure doctrinal stance than some of these other ones. Wally?
By just this study today, it appears to me that Ockham went after the doctrines of the Catholic Church.
Yeah, well,
whereas,
and that's why he's kicked out.
right. Whereas Aquinas did not go after the doctrine.
Yeah, Aquinas is... Aquinas, if this is let's say this box is Catholic doctrine. Aquinas stays in the box. Okay? He does some things that are possibly useful within the confines of the box, but Ockham leaves it. And as a result, he's what? He's excommunicated.
But maybe if Aquinas had kept living and kept thinking, he might have stepped out too.
Maybe. But I don't think so.
You don't think so?
Aquinas, look, I hesitate, I don't want to be crass, but Aquinas was getting his butt kissed while he was alive. Quite substantially. And so there was real motivation for him to stay in the box. Okay? It takes a rare individual to decide, you know what, I don't care what the people in the box say. They can take me and tie me to a piece of wood and burn me. I'm more worried about what's true than I am about getting the approval of these birds in here. Does that make sense? All right. What you have next in your notes for the next 2.5 pages is a summary of all of the general church councils throughout the Middle Ages. Okay? And the different rulings and the different things that they decided. Now, I don't feel, since we are out of time, that this warrants me commenting to you directly on what you can read yourself. Okay? So, I'm not going to go over these things specifically with you here. You can read them on your own in your own notes and ask me if you have any questions about them. Okay? But you do need to read it because it's an excellent summary of seeing how the things that we've talked about throughout the Middle Ages made their way and were discussed in the councils of the church. Okay? And what do we already know about the Roman Catholic view of the church councils? When a council rules, is it viewed as authoritative? Yes. So they covered, I'll just point out a couple highlights. If I can just take a few minutes on this. On page 5, the Third Council of Constantinople. It reaffirmed that Christ had two natures, but look at the second bulleted point. Referred to Mary as our Holy Lady, the Holy, Immaculate, Ever Virgin, and Glorious Mary, truly and properly the Mother of God. So that's an official church statement on that. Look at the Second Council of Nicaea, the next one, 787. Just looking at what was, notice that it said that would not salute the holy and venerable images. It called sacred images idols. And so this is when they're attacking the images. Okay? When we talked about the iconoclasts and how when the Paulicians were living that they had a reprieve for persecution during the iconoclastic emperors and so forth. If you look at, go to the next page. The First Lateran Council in 1123 was the first church council that was called by a pope. Okay? The Third Lateran Council systematizes how the Pope is going to be elected. Restricted to the College of Cardinals and 2/3 majority of the College of Cardinals to select a new Pope. The Fourth Lateran Council, this is Innocent II. This is important. He pronounced, they officially accepted the doctrine of transubstantiation. They pronounced the primacy of the Roman bishop, the dogma of the seven sacraments, and they set up and empowered the Inquisition to investigate and punish those suspected of heresy. These are rulings by official church councils. Okay? And you can pretty much kind of go through the rest of those on your own. But they cover, in summary form, the major things that we've been discussing over the last, 7 to 8 weeks. Are there any questions about today's lesson? Yes, ma'am.
I'm counting down, because these all have different names. It looks like the seventh one was that Fourth Lateran Council, so that would be the last one that the Greek Orthodox Church
Yep. There's a note on there, which is the last one they... I get these, you read too much of this stuff and they all run together, okay, so... But it does make a note in there about which is the last one they accepted.
What's the difference between some of the different movements within, like the Dominicans and you've got some other ones? What made those? How did they differ and yet remain faithful to Rome?
They mostly differ in specifically how they carry out their. They're all monkish. They're all different orders of monks. Benedictine, Dominican, Jesuits is different. We haven't got to the Jesuits yet.
Franciscans.
They're just, as far as I can tell, Lee, they're just different in how they're focusing on how to carry out the mandates of their monkhood, I guess. Different rules about what monks can do and can't do, but they're all sanctioned by the Catholic Church.
Pastor, even today, we're still knocking some of this stuff out. So we believe this, and we sit back and we say, they're fighting. And we still have the same fight today. We got Rob Bella's book coming out pretty soon. And the whole thing is up on the web. It is.
Well,
what's the fundamentals of the church? It's always going to be that fight, isn't it, or tension?
Yeah, what did Solomon say? There's nothing new under the sun. Rob Bell is not some new genius. He's just, if he in fact is teaching universalism, he's teaching the same thing Origen taught.
Yeah.
We went over it. I gave you Origen in his own words when he says that everybody's going to go to heaven. Okay, that there is no hell, that eternal punishment isn't real. So it's all things repeating with a different terminology, a different packaging, a different, way of discussing it, but it's essentially fundamentally the same stuff. But we got to quit. Thanks for your attention. And next week we're going to move on. We're going to look at John Wycliffe and the Lollards.